but none of you have to make any sacrifices. They didn't do it. They said we're facing an existential threat and we have to pull together for the common good. I mean, Churchill's speech to his people was basically, I promise you suffering, toil, etc. And he was right. And the British people responded and the American people responded. And we have, in my sense, we have developed a culture within our political class and within the public that seems to say that the way to get elected and the way to keep people happy is to not tell them the truth, is to not ask for shared sacrifice, is to not ask them to aspire to something greater for the common good, but appeal to the short-term interest and to the selfish interest at the expense of the good and at the expense of the future. And that will not sustain as a country. And we need, I think, as all of us as voters, to demand something more from that and to step forward and say I want to demand something more. And I think that then will liberate, as it were, representatives to be less frightened of asking people to give something more. So with that, let me open it up for any questions or comments.
I appreciate what you were just saying, and would also express a concern about democracy slowly slipping away from us as powerful corporations and financial interests that are powerful really controlling more and more of the voting. Do you like the Canadian system or some other system that you might suggest that would perhaps put more of democracy back in our hands?
It's a great question. If I could do one single thing, just one, it would be change campaign finance in the following way. I would ban all personal contributions or corporate or union or association, and I would say each candidate who gets a certain threshold of support in a signature kind of fashion gets a fixed amount of money, and that's it. And I'm passionate about the Bill of Rights. I love the First Amendment. I understand deeply the free speech issues. But here's the life of a politician today. In the House, you run it every 2 years, and if you're in a contested seat, you need to raise at least $2 million. And on top of the $2 million in a very contested seat, on top of the $2 million you raise, you have to figure that other interest groups are going to drop 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 million on you, depending on the nature of the competitive race. In the Senate, it's even worse. There, you're looking at $7 to $20 million, and you spend your entire life on the telephone, not talking with constituents, not studying issues, not working on policy, but begging people for money. Some of you have been kind enough to give me some. I'm very grateful for that over the years. But it is first of all a time suck. It is second of all subjects you to the possibility of influence because it's illegal to say to someone, if you vote this way, we will give you a check. But you know darn well when you say or do certain things, I've said plenty today that would cost me a lot if I ever ran again. But you know that contributions get tied to votes, and you know that taints thinking. Now beyond that, the Citizens United decision is one of the worst things that's ever happened in the United States of America. That is not hyperbole. Citizens United is the decision, the Supreme Court decision that basically said corporations, individuals, unions can spend infinite amounts of money, largely anonymously. And so you have, imagine you spent 2 years of your life, you're running for office again, you've done a good job, you've raised a couple $1 million, but during that time you have spent probably 10 to 15 hours a week, not with your family, not with your constituents, on the phone or at fundraisers begging for money. 10 to 15 hours of precious, precious time you'll never get back, that's not used for what you're there for. At the end, you maybe raise $2 million. Some person you've never met, doesn't live in your district, takes out a checkbook and writes a $1 million check, or a $2 million check, or a $5 million check. They can do that and carpet bomb you. And that's the world that politicians live in today. And I can't tell you how pernicious it is. It destroys the system. And it destroys your soul as a politician.
How do you see the debt ceiling impasse being resolved?
Well, I think we have to resolve it. we have to, I mean, as I mentioned, the number of times I've asked about fiscal implications of bills, some of you ever lobbied me in DC, people would come and ask for either more tax cuts or more spending. It's always the case when people come to visit. I get that. I would give people the copy of the front page of the budget. This was back under the Bush years when budget deficit was growing rapidly. And I would say, where do we pay for this? And I would show them the very numbers I gave you. Nobody wanted to deal with that. And so here we are. You cannot default on the good faith and credit of the United States of America. And there are people who say, oh, well, we wouldn't default. We would actually just take money that would go to other things and start paying off the interest. Okay, pick your things. Tell us what those things are, but also tell the rest of the world is not looking positively about how we're dealing with our fiscal situation. And it's not just that we have a deficit. It's the intransigence of people in dealing responsibly with the deficit. Now, frankly, if you can get $2 or $3 or $4 trillion of savings, that's pretty big through cuts. That's massive. By the way, I should say, it's going to have a huge impact locally. It's all fine to say, well, we're just going to cut $4 trillion of that federal budget. Where do we think that money has gone? It has gone to roads, it has gone to flood control projects, it's gone to water treatment centers, it's gone to shelters for children, it's gone to our education system, it's gone to our energy infrastructure, it's gone to our defense, it's gone to our soldiers, it's gone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we just say we're going to knock off $4 trillion, that is not an inconsequential thing to do, especially at a time of a fragile economic recovery. But if you can do it, that's pretty remarkable. But you still won't get even close to balance over time without a revenue increase. And when you've got people like Grover Norquist insisting that you have to sign a pledge, by the way, that pledge disqualifies Ronald Reagan. The pledge to never raise taxes profoundly disqualifies Ronald Reagan. It disqualifies George Bush the first. It disqualifies lots of people. So somehow Grover Norquist is better than Ronald Reagan? That's pretty preposterous. And I don't know how centrist Republicans or Democrats can possibly swallow that. If they don't get around it, I think what's going to happen is some kind of bargain, but the House is going to hang it up. There will be many Republicans, especially the new members, who will say they won't support raising the debt ceiling because they're now gone from, it went from we have to be fiscally responsible to now we have to amend the Constitution in the middle of a big crisis, and that kind of absolutism is just not going to get you there. 3 years ago, before the Dems recaptured the House, I said to a colleague on the Republican side, you know, if we take it back or you take it back, we've got to be like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Remember that great scene when they're pinned to the cliff and they've got like 6 bullets left and there's 9 guys out there and they start doing the math and said, we're in big trouble here. And Paul Newman says to Robert Redford, we're going to have to jump. And Robert Redford says, no, I'm going to fight it out. And he says, you can't do that. Redford says, I can't swim. And Newman says, well, the fall's going to kill us. And so they have to jump. If you remember the scene, they jump off this big cliff into a river. So I said this to a colleague, very prominent, a friend on the Republican side. I said, we've got to be like that. The Democrats are going to have to be willing to cut spending on social programs, and we're going to have to reduce the growth of entitlements. And the Republicans are going to have to raise revenue and address defense. It's just, can't do it any other way. And he said, no, I'd rather watch you jump off alone. Well, that's pretty telling. If you just are so absolutist, you're still going to get shot. If you kind of didn't, watch the movie again. You know, watch the movie. There was a reason they jumped off together. So I don't know if they're going to work it out or not. You know, there's now this talk of a grand compromise. We're going to have a special committee. You know, I'm good friends with Alan Simpson. Very good friends with Al Simpson from Wyoming. Very funny guy, by the way. Al, when I had, I don't think he'd mind if I told this. When I had twins, Alan dropped me a nice note, and he said, I didn't ever know if I ever told you that I'm married to a twin. And Alan's a hysterically funny guy, if you know him. And he said, people used to ask me how I could tell the difference between my wife and her sister, and I'd say, I don't think that's my responsibility. But Al, you know, Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles are two of the finest people you ever hope to meet. Down-to-earth, practical guys. They came up with a good blueprint. We ought to just do it. I don't agree with everything in it, but do it. But so now we're going to have yet another blue ribbon thing. What's going to happen? The extremists on one side are going to demand that they get extremists pointed to their position, their side of the super group, whatever it's called. The extremists on the other side are going to say, we have to never cut entitlements. Bang, you're going to be 6 months down the road, not solid. The only way it changes is the American people say, don't default, do cut spending, but not draconian right now because we've got a recovery, but do it over time, and including entitlements, including defense, and raise my taxes because I don't want to pass the debt on to the kids.
Well, talk a little bit about the last Churchill and Roosevelt, and it seems to me that was a pay-as-you-go kind of a mindset. They recognized they were going to war, they needed to be able to have the dollars to back that up. They weren't basically borrowing to conduct a war or to recover the economy. What changed? What changed in terms of the mindset? You studied this effectively. What changed is that, we can basically set aside trillions of dollars for war efforts. We can set aside the dollars, and we're not going to have to pay those back until some other time. By the way, I still have my Baird signed in my garage.
Keep it there. Who knows? I may lose my meds again. And people used to ask me why I ran for Congress, and I said I forgot my meds. One of the biggest challenges is when people say, well, look, we've had deficits comparable to GDP in the past. Yeah, except that. In the past, we did not have the baby boom generation about to draw on all the money rather than put the money in. Point one, absolutely critical. Two, in the past, we were the strongest economy in the world. We didn't have one. If you want to get scared to death, go online and look at the skyline pictures of Doha, Qatar, of the Pudong district of Shanghai. These are astonishing places. As Tom Friedman said, if you fly from Shanghai to LA, it's like flying from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. The numbers of impressive, astonishing buildings going up in those cities alone are more than the entire United States of America combined. They build out of the desert entire brand new educational institutions with U.S. schools, by the way, our top schools teaching over there. Adjacent to it, a science city that's drawing scientists from around the world. They build them overnight. They do it in China as well. So we didn't have that kind of competition. We were not dependent to the degree we are now on foreign oil. We didn't structure in a sense of entitlement. The I in OASDI stands for insurance, not entitlement. And so you've got an entitlement culture dependent on foreign oil, trying to maintain a military presence around the world, retiring demographics, problematic demographics, and international competition. When we've talked about coming out of recessions in the past, none of those applied. And they all apply now. And so our levers, whether it's monetary stimulus or fiscal stimulus, they're constrained. They're substantially constrained, and people just don't want to deal with it. And last but not least, and incredibly importantly, we built an economy based on consumption and credit. What drives the American economy? Consumption. Not production, but consumption. And so when the economy collapses, people say, oh, we got to go shop more. Oh, I guess I'll have to. That's quite a sacrifice. But, there's this idea we're just going to borrow it and buy it. That's at the federal level. It's at the personal level. It was partly responsible for the housing bust, et cetera, et cetera. All those things together have gotten us in a terrible mess. And that's, frankly, why I start the book with character. Because until you change how we approach problems, you can't solve it on a policy basis unless people say, this is the reality of the situation, and we can deal with it courageously and responsibly and honestly, but we have to deal with it. And I think we can. I think the American people, the people in this room, are here because you believe in a greater good, a greater community good. You differ on political spectrum, you differ in religious ideology, differ economically, in business, but you believe fundamentally that the American people in our local communities are decent, good, positive contributors to the world. And we are. And we have to be. Without the United States of America, and even all the people who shout against us around the world, deep down, there are a lot of people who say, boy, I don't like America, but thank God they're here. And that we are as good as we are. We are a fine country, but we're in some trouble right now, and we need to rally on that deeper inner strength and have faith in that inner strength for people to do the right thing, because if we don't, we're going to not get there, and we can't afford to pass that legacy on. Thanks for letting me join you, and thanks for your work.
No, thank you. We're truly honored, and you'll be willing to stay around for a few minutes afterwards.
How do we find this book again?
It's on, thank you. I'll give you some other. It's on lulu.com, or I've got a few up here. Lulu.com.
All right, we want to thank you again, and we have a small token. Made in China? No. our last token item is to have you pick a raffle ticket here. So.
All right.